Hey there, students. I'm going to talk to you today about the foundations of absolutism. This is going to be the first in a lecture series on absolutism in early modern Europe. This goes out to Mr. N's class, whose students must make up about a third of my Twitter followers right now. Thank y'all for watching, and hopefully y'all will comment on the videos, keep tweeting about them, tell your friends about them. I appreciate it. But I do need to tell y'all, stop tweeting during class. This means you, Taylor. Going on, let's talk about the Absolutist. In the next few lectures, we're going to talk about Louis XIV of France, Peter the Great of Russia, and the Fredericks of Prussia. A bunch of Fredericks, luckily they're all named Frederick, they're all from Prussia. But these are the Absolutists, and these guys are all in power around the mid to late 17th century and early 18th century, and their goal is sovereignty. Now, sovereignty is a big theme in this unit, so make sure you know what that is. Sovereignty means supreme and independent power. These absolutists were trying to set up sovereignty under their own rule. As Louis XIV once said, pimpin' ain't easy. Even though he makes it look like it. I mean, check out that cane. I mean, he really does a good job at this. Makes it look simple, but it's not. Absolute rulers had a lot to contend with in order to set themselves up as the sovereign. Lots of challenges that these kings faced, a lot like really playing a game of chess in real life. Now, keep in mind that the game of chess has a lot of things in common with what European kings faced during the Middle Ages. Keep in mind that in chess, the king is the weakest piece, whereas the absolutists are trying to become the strongest piece. They're really trying to turn the whole chess thing on its head. Now, who are these other competitors in the game of chess? First of all, the church. Second, nobility. Third, representative bodies. Fourth, towns. And fifth, the universities. And the absolutists are going to have to contend with all of these institutions in order to set themselves up as the sovereign rulers of their nations. So first of all, the church. Today we think about church as somewhere we go to get spiritual nourishment or whatever, and there's a pastor there that has authority, but not any binding authority. The pastor can certainly make recommendations to you on living a good life and that sort of thing, and maybe even tell you, you're going to hell if you don't do what he says. But in early modern Europe, you didn't have the same kind of separation of church and state that we have today, so the church held temporal power. In a lot of cases, the bishop would also be the secular authority in a region. And the church, even though its power is declining, still has plenty of wealth. When you look at cathedrals like the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and you think, wow, that is magnificent. It took a lot of money and power to build that. And the church at this time still held a considerable influence in places like France and Russia. Peter the Great especially is going to have to contend with a very powerful Russian Orthodox Church. Second, the nobility, that castle-looking chess piece. The medieval kings did not rule their whole countries. They'd rule part of their country, and then they would give the rest out to these various nobles who would make a deal with them. They would make a feudal contract where the king provides land to the vassal, and in return the vassal provides fealty to his king. He swears an oath that when the king goes to war, he will provide knights and foot soldiers for the king's army. So when the king went to war, you saw people fighting not under the king's banner, but under the banner of their various lords. Medieval armies were diverse, and the king didn't have total control over the thing. Europe was governed more like a quilt. Feudalism, think about that, where the nations kind of parceled out with these lord-vassal contracts. If we look at feudal France, we can see various points the king controls. He's got his own personal domain. And then you take a look at Burgundy, which these guys during the 100 Years' War, they turned coat to the English for a little while. Then they went back to the French. So sometimes these vassals would betray their king if they thought that it would be advantageous. The nobles also had castles that protected them in the case of a fight with the king, and there were a lot of times when nobles would rebel against their king. Put that phone away, Taylor. This has to stop. The absolute ruler has to figure out a way to bring the whole nation under his own personal rule. The next group we have to worry about are representative bodies. These are symbolized by not only the castles and chess, but the knights. These are the gentry, landowners, who, in addition to the nobility and the church, would have to consent to taxation in the Middle Ages. If the king wanted to tax, he would call one of these representative bodies. In England, known as Parliament; in France, the Estates General; in Prussia, the Junkers. So these people would consent to taxation, and the king couldn't just tax by decree, just say, okay, I'm going to tax you this much and you're going to pay up. No, not if you didn't ask us. So one of the goals of the absolutist will be to be able to tax by decree, to be able to tax because they said so. Towns and cities. You notice when you go into the city limits, there are certain things that you can't do in the city limits that you can do outside of the city limits. Some cities have bans on shooting fireworks, shooting firearms, all kinds of other things, that the laws are a little different inside a city than outside the city. Now, this is because cities have special charters that allow them to make rules a little bit differently than the rest of the country. For example, in South Carolina, where I live, it is standard not to be able to buy alcohol on Sundays, but certain cities and towns can make exceptions within their city limits. And in the same way, every town and city would have a royal charter, and the king would grant that city or town special privileges. So the king is giving up his right to rule inside the town, and if he wants to make rules, they'd say, look, we've got our charter that says that we can do this. And if the king decided, well, I'm going to bring my army at you, well, the towns had walls. Just like the nobles had castles, the towns could defend themselves if the king wanted to attack. And finally, the universities, which were controlled by the church. Now, today, 90% of Americans attend public schools. The government controls our education system in the United States. But kings did not have that kind of power in the Middle Ages. People learned what the church wanted them to learn. So this was yet another way that the churches were powerful. And if the kings were going to set themselves up as sovereign, they were going to need to establish some control over the system of education. So again, just to review, these institutions that had privileges that threatened the absolutist right to rule were the church, the nobility, the representative bodies, the towns, and the universities. All of these institutions would have to be put into check. So the king's goal, the absolutist goal, is to take all of these pieces and do kind of like a checkmate in reverse checkmate. So all of the other pieces are down and the king is still standing. The king is sovereign. The king is sovereign when he is allowed to rule, and all of these institutions are subordinated to him. So stay tuned for lectures on Louis XIV of France, Peter the Great of Russia, and the Fredericks of Prussia. Subscribe to my channel. Lots more where this came from. I'll get you prepared for whatever test you're trying to prepare for, or if you just want to learn stuff, I can help you with that too. Be more than happy to do that. Until next time. Taylor, stop tweeting during class. Hashtag pay attention. Hashtag learn something.